So first of all, Mr. President, thanks for sitting down with
Thank
me
you
today.
so much.
You've made it very clear that you would like Muammar Qaddafi to leave.
Mm-hmm.
We know what you want the end goal to be,
Right.
but what if he doesn't go?
Mm-hmm. Well, look, I think it's too early to tell what's going to happen. Here's what we do know. Because of our intervention, probably thousands of lives have been saved. Gaddafi's forces have been greatly degraded, so he can do a lot less damage, a lot less harm inside of Libya. We've been able to set up a no-fly zone that assures that he's not using his air power against his own people. We've put in place an embargo on arms, so he can't bring more supplies in. So the noose is tightened around him. And we are now going to be moving into a phase where, having maintained the no-fly zone, continuing to protect the Libyan people, we've got to ratchet up our diplomatic and our political pressure on him, and that's what Secretary Clinton's meeting with other interested parties in London was all about, mobilizing the world community to continue to put the squeeze on him so that at some point he makes a decision to leave. Now, I can't guarantee that that's going to happen overnight. Obviously, this is still a unsettled situation inside of Libya, but our presence, our leadership on the world stage has made a difference in making sure that there's the time and the space for people who want their freedom in Libya to try to achieve it.
You mentioned the meetings that Secretary Clinton is having in London today. She's also meeting with one of the rebel envoys. Are there also discussions and even perhaps meetings at all with people in Muammar Qaddafi's camp?
Well, I think that Gaddafi's camp, people around him, are starting to recognize that their options are limited and their days are numbered. And so they are probably reaching out to a range of different people. But that information may not have filtered to Gaddafi yet. And I think it's too early for us to start having formal negotiations. Gaddafi knows exactly what he needs to do to actually implement a ceasefire. He's got to pull out of places like Misrata, where he's cut off water and food and medical supplies to the populations there. He's got to stop going on the offensive in certain areas. He knows steps he could take that would stop the constant bombardment that he's under, and it may at some point shift to him figuring out how to negotiate an exit, but I don't think we're at that point yet.
So let's say, though, he sticks around for a little bit longer and maintains control on even just part of the country.
Right.
How long can the coalition go on enforcing this no-fly zone?
Well, one of the important things that we did was to make sure that we didn't go in there alone. And that was important not only to make sure that an already overstretched U.S. military wasn't overextended, that an already overstretched U.S. Taxpayer wasn't fully footing the bill. But it was also important because it meant that with a strong international mandate and international participation, we can maintain that no-fly zone for a more significant period of time. We've already transitioned out, so the day-to-day overflights to maintain a no-fly zone in Libya are no longer primarily the U.S. responsibility. We're still helping to refuel and jam communications and provide intelligence, but we've taken out their air defenses. His forces are severely degraded, and that means many partner countries, not only our NATO allies, but also Arab countries like Qatar and the United Arab Emirates, who have air forces, are able to help implement that no-fly zone. And that means that it can be sustained for a prolonged period of time.
Let's talk about who these rebel forces are. There are so many questions about even who Secretary Clinton was meeting with today. The Supreme Allied Commander for NATO said today that there are flickers of al-Qaeda and Hezbollah amongst these rebels. And yet the administration also said today a liaison is being sent to Benghazi so that there's closer proximity there. How do we know what their end goal is? And how do we know they won't, in fact, turn on the U.S. and on our allies?
Well, first of all, I think it's important to note that the people that we've met with have been fully vetted. So we have a clear sense of who they are. And so far, they're saying the right things, and most of them are professionals, lawyers, doctors, people who appear to be credible. That doesn't mean that all the people who, among all the people who opposed Gaddafi, there might not be elements that are unfriendly to the United States and our interests. And that's why I think it's important for us not to jump in with both feet, but to carefully consider what are the goals of the opposition, what kind of transition do they want to bring about inside of Libya, because our main concern here is the Libyan people as well as stability in the region. It does mean that we will start providing non-lethal aid to them, medical supplies, communications equipment, and so forth. But before we made any considerations, for example, about providing them arms, I think it's important for us to have a clearer sense both of what the impact would be on the ground, what their goals and aims are. As I said last night, we should anticipate that the process of transition in Libya to a more representative government, one that respects human rights, is going to be a little bit bumpy. It's not going to happen smoothly. But part of the function of that conference in London today was to make sure that the international community, the United Nations and other parties are as responsible for that outcome as we are, so that we're not, again, going through what we went through in Iraq, where you've got a hugely complicated sectarian divisions, and suddenly we're having to babysit that entire process over a long number of years.
You mentioned you're learning a little bit more about their goals. Can you give us an idea of what some of those goals are beyond just removing Gaddafi from power?
Well, so far, as I said, they've said the right thing. They'd like to see free and fair elections. They believe that human rights need to be respected inside of Libya. And so if you look at the documents that they've prepared and presented, I think that they are on the right track. But Libya is a large country, and there are a lot of people, and a lot of people with resentments towards Gaddafi who consider themselves part of the opposition. They may have very different views about where Libya should go. And it's important for us to make sure that whoever it is that we're dealing with, whoever it is that we're helping, that we share with them the primary goal of Gaddafi stepping down. It's hard to imagine a leader in Libya that potentially would be worse than Gaddafi. On the other hand, we shouldn't go in with blinders and automatically assume that everyone that we're dealing with is on the up and up. It is important for us to have some modesty also about that process in Libya. Ultimately, Libya's governance is going to be up to the Libyan people, and we can have some influence over that. But again, part of what my goal here has been is to protect the Libyan people, to give them the space and the time to work this stuff out, but not to take entire responsibility for ushering in a entirely new government process. I think that's something that the international community has to be a part of, and we'll play our role in it. But it's not just something that we do by ourselves.
We're not going to lead the charge on it. You mentioned the region. There's obviously so much focus on the region at this point from everything we've seen over the last couple of months. There is renewed focus, though, on Syria and what is happening there. It's a country that has been declared a state sponsor of terrorism, has been openly hostile towards Israel. What would it take? What circumstances in particular would lead to direct involvement from the U.S. in Syria?
Well, I'm not going to speculate on what those circumstances would be. As I said last night, the Libyan situation was in many ways unique. We could save lives right away with relatively limited risk, expense, and military commitments. We had a broad international coalition. We had Arab countries that were supportive of it. All those factors may not exist in other countries. Obviously, our attitude towards Libya is grounded in some core principles that I've been talking about since we had the first upheavals in Tunisia. And that is, we don't believe in governments that open fire on their own people. We don't believe in governments that are not abiding by core human rights and freedom of expression and freedom of assembly. And so we will continue to put pressure on Syria to live up to those standards. Those are international standards. Those aren't U.S. standards. We'll monitor the situation, and to the extent that we think we can have an impact that's positive inside of Syria or anywhere else in the region, we will do so. But when it comes to military intervention, I think the circumstances in which we start getting engaged in military operations have to be very narrowly drawn, and that's what I tried to communicate last night.
And in terms of that, has there been any talks, I should say, at the UN, specifically because this current situation in Libya is an international coalition, or any talks that Ambassador Rice is having about this situation in Syria, so that there is some sort of preparation if a decision needs to be made quickly?
Well, I think that events are happening so fast in the region. Obviously, you've got countries like Yemen, where there's been significant upheaval. You've got countries like Bahrain, where the government there, I think, has tried to reach out to the opposition and tried to engage in political settlements, but there's also been demonstrations of massive scale, and there has been some violence. Each of these countries is going to require probably a tailored approach. And how we can influence and make a difference is going to depend on that particular country. We're looking at the situation in Syria. We're looking at the situation in all of these countries, and we will shape a diplomatic and political strategy around each one that tries to maximize the space for people to be able to express their own desires for freedom, democracy, and representation.
I was going to give you a hard time about your bracket, but it's kind of rough.
Yeah,
Don't go with number one seats next time.
I think what's clear is that for all the attention it got, I didn't have enough time to pay attention.
Maybe you did. But one thing I just want to warn you about while you're in New York today, there's a snake on the loose from the Bronx Zoo. You can follow it on Twitter, but just in case, if you find it, call the Bronx Zoo.
I will let them know.
Mr. President, thank you.
Thank you so much.